Please welcome Architect Ahmad Rozi Abd Wahab. Please give a round of applause to him.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning to everyone. Probably that was about the only best thing I can offer you today, the little dance just before I came in. But anyways, today I'm going to talk a little bit about architectural history for the past 30 years and how that really relates to the work that I've been doing. And I've only been given about 20 minutes, and I'm going to pack it all in there, and so I hope all of you can bear with me. It's a little bit dry, so here goes. As a practicing architect, practicing about 25 years ago, I find it tough for young emerging architectural firms to secure jobs. Every time a scheme or proposal was presented, they get turned down. Proposals after proposals, these young architects fail to secure projects. Soon I realized that these architects does not have the skills to actually manage the client's expectations. The ego and the lack of understanding has resulted in this condition. It was a common attitude for young emerging architects at that time. And architects were pushing for innovation, and on the other hand, clients always feel safe pursuing symbolism. This is where I feel architects and clients both need to listen to each other more. Ideas need to converge. In the year 1996, 2 years after I started my practice, I had the opportunity to design the Prime Minister's office in Putrajaya. The iconic building is very ornate, with lots of reference to historical and cultural symbols. After 20 years, in 2016, I completed another project in Putrajaya, which was totally modern, ignoring all the ornate elements of the classical order. Totally different product. And I realized that I was swinging creativity like a pendulum. At one time it was symbolism, and another it was innovation. I would like to share with you a talk by Mark Kushner, an architect from the United States, on the principle of this pendulum. On one hand, architects are taught to learn from the past using symbolism and sometimes striving towards innovation. Architects have been swinging this pendulum for the past 300 years, and certainly for the last 30-odd years has been experimenting on new approaches that relates to symbolism. Since the 60s, we had brutalism, neoclassicism, postmodernism, deconstructivism, and a lot of other ism. That's what's going on. It was time when architects were searching for narratives in architecture. When you look at these buildings, you know I know what you think. Immediately, you think about power, you think about stability, you think about democracy. It's a very predictable thing. It's always in you, and you feel safe to say that, because it was based on a building that was built by the Greeks 2,500 years ago. And this trick that we architects use to create this predictable emotional connection, and architects have been using these symbols for hundreds of years, and certainly the past 30 years, and these forms and symbols that we are familiar with, and we feel safe to use them. And this is a very, very useful, because building things are terrifying. They are very expensive. They take a long time to build, and it is very complicated. And the people who built these buildings, the developers, the governments, they are naturally afraid of innovation. They rather use those symbolic forms that we mentioned earlier, that they are very familiar with. Mark Kushner, in his talk, went on to compare two libraries that was built in the same year on the opposite side of the United States, one in New Jersey and one in Seattle. Both are libraries. And how did these two libraries, built in the same year, in the same country, came out completely different? Well, the answer to that is architecture works on the principle of this pendulum. On the one side, it is innovation. We architects constantly pushing towards technology, towards new typology, new solutions, a new way of living. Architects push and we push until they completely alienate everyone. And we get depressed, architects feel empty inside, and we have no choice but to go back to re-engage those symbols again that everyone loves and that everyone feels safe with. And suddenly we feel like we are sellouts again. The pendulum swings back to symbolism, and this went on and on and on. It swings back and forth, and for the last 300 years, we have been doing that, and certainly for the last 30 years. Right, 30 years ago, in the 70s, architects are busy experimenting with brutalism. Off from concrete, small windows, dehumanizing scale. Well, this is really tough stuff, you know. And as we get closer to the 80s, we start to re-engage those symbols again. Architects swings the pendulum back in the other direction. Architects took the symbols that we know you love, and we try them again and again. So we add pastels on the walls, we add neon, we add new materials, and you just loved it. And everyone loved it in the 80s. We made Chippendale armories and turned it into skyscrapers. We have classical columns turned into buildings. Forms got big, buildings got bold, huge keystone painted on facades. Dwarf became columns, swan statues grew to the size of a building. It was cool. It was the 80s. That's the thing about postmodernism and symbolism. It's easy, it's cheap. Instead of making places, we were making memories of places. Then we got fed up with it and went into the 80s. We experiment with something else we call deconstructivism, and the pendulum swings back in the other direction. And in the 90s, again, we stripped away all the historical symbols. We see forms clashing into forms. We used new computer-aided design techniques and came up with new compositions. So Mark Kushner, in his talk, went on and on about media, how media actually plays an important role in making that gap between symbolism and innovation closer. Architects no longer need to wait 20 years to get a feedback to see if the design was a success or was it a failure. We have realistic multimedia presentations now to share and test it out before it was built. But that's not what I intended to talk about today. Today I want to talk about how symbolism and innovation can get closer together in a different form. Before that, let's look at 3 resources on how things are built. We have time, we have cost, and we have creative energy. Architects have no control over time nor cost. However, architects have influence over creativity, and creativity is something that the clients desire out of the architect. However, not all the time architects have a free hand to create. He is still subjected to external influences, such as the client's desires, end users' expectations, and public aspirations. So the power lies in the ability of the architect to manage these influences by being a good listener and good educator. Hence, the convergence. The convergence is where the pendulum stays in the middle and blurs the difference between symbolism and innovation. Well, our work, since we started 23 years ago, has been moving back and forth with the same pendulum. With certain clients, it was innovation, and with some other clients, it was symbolism. And the pendulum kept on swinging from side to side. So the first example of my work is heavily swung towards symbolism. This is the Prime Minister's office in Putrajaya. It is the administrative seat of the nation. It portrays a sense of power, a sense of stability, and a sense of balance. Located on a high ground, the building facade makes its presence felt with a commanding view of the city. Although it was built with new technological construction method, the building still maintains its classical proportions and form, as it was intended to be. Even the layout has courtyards that are common to most European stately buildings. The client at that time aspired to these symbolic gestures to represent order and power. Instead of a European classic dome, this building has an onion dome shape similar to a dome from mosque in Kedah. They felt the need to relate the past and to be safe. The client aspired to celebrate the cultural heritage and historical crafts by adorning the facade with details and symbols that are related to the people. Now, looking back, I feel that symbolism used really works. It gives the sense of timelessness that relates to Malaysian culture and historical narratives. The next project, the pendulum swings the other direction. That is to innovate. I was commissioned to design the auditorium, a section of a larger development for the Putrajaya City Hall complex. It was my intention to celebrate its function innovatively and drive away all historical and cultural objects. The auditorium is a unique building in the shape of a zeppelin. It's like a flying ship, a bahtera in Malay, that floats 7 meters above the entrance hall, supported by 10 A-shaped columns, which gives dramatic effect as one enters the hall. We were very innovative in this project, but at the same time, there were some symbolic gestures in it as well, in the form of experience. So the journey actually carries you to another realm, the theatrical realm. However, as an element of surprise, the floating zeppelin is enclosed within a screen and glass wall, and once you are inside, the auditorium structure is visible. About the same time as the auditorium, we were also commissioned to design the Palace of Justice. It is located right opposite the auditorium. The facade is decorated with classical Islamic and Malay architectural motifs. Ironically, the design is very much symbolic in nature as compared to the auditorium, expressing old grandeur and nobility, timeless in quality. The results illustrate power through sheer size and classical order. Symmetry facade reflects balance, judgment, and highly symbolic to the function that's happening inside. As one enters the main hall, one could not avoid the sense of respect that the space demands. A very high emotional connection to symbols, and very highly charged. It's very highly charged here. The Palace of Justice are just rich in details. The grey stone-colored facades being symbolic color of seriousness, dignity, of old and wise. Here, I use innovative new technology to achieve highly charged symbols. Then in 2008, the pendulum swung the other way towards innovation, where we applied rectangular box with straight lines and efficient floor spaces. This is the new income tax office in Sungai Petani in Kedah. No more decorative columns, no more decorative details, and devoid of any classical proportions. Simple solutions for simple requirement of a governmental agency office. And in 2003, we had the opportunity to work and collaborated with Cisapelli Associates from the US. It is a 60-story office building for Petronas, next to the famous Petronas Twin Towers, just next door. The experience working with an American architect, the approach to design are purely avoiding symbols and strive towards perfecting construction innovation. Both Pelli and our office drove the design towards technological and constructional innovation. It is devoid of any embellishment or decoration and has successfully played a role as a backdrop to the Petronas Twin Towers, which is the national icon. The floor plates were from two basic geometry of a rectangle and a triangle interlocking each other. And at a certain level, only the triangle floor plates rises up to the 60th floor. The facades were more subtle and subdued as not to overdo the Twin Towers. Although stripped of any embellishment or any historic reference, it still has its own elegance and finesse. Although the facades are in contrast to the more ornate Twin Towers, the materials and details chosen does not alienate each other. They stand side by side elegantly. In this scheme, the pendulum swings towards innovation. In 2003, I was invited to participate in a design competition for an oil company headquarters building in Sudan. We won the first prize. The design calls for an iconic office building. Here, innovation and symbolism actually merged. In the design, I managed to push innovation with new technology, new materials, new ideas, but with a form that has an emotional symbolic gestures of the past, mud towers that is found in Sudan. I think here the pendulum really stays in the middle, hopefully for good. In this next project, I continue keeping the pendulum equilibrium. It's neither going towards the innovation or the symbolism. This is a project in 2003 where we collaborated with Mr. Bob Kessler, who has a practice based in Hong Kong, to design a luxury apartment not very far from KLCC. Due to its tiny site, only 2 units per floor was designed on a butterfly-shaped floor plate. Even though we were designing towards innovation, the butterfly-shaped plan are in a way symbolic. It represents lightness, it represents flight. The gentle curves of the facade, the rounded soft corners, evokes gestures that are different from the normal straight walls that we have in residential units. This gives new and different symbolic meaning and feel to the internal spaces. Carrying through the idea of merging, we embarked into a smaller project, which is a bungalow. The forms were basic, whitewashed, simple blocks clashing into one another, taking ideas from the old traditional Malay house, sitting on wooden stilts. This new simple form sits on a round pilates, giving the impression of a floating box. The concept is based on the idea of a family being protected by the head of the family. He threw out both his arms, one arm lined with the Qiblat, Makkah, and the other arm in line with the cardinal axis, the east and west. With the arms extended out, he faces east, embracing the morning sun and celebrates the coming of a new day, forming a small courtyard for the family to enjoy with full privacy of the neighbors and the street. Meaningful and fully functional internal spaces were carefully connected to ensure a workable family experiences to happen. The house was completed in 2011, and this is also a very good example where both symbolism and innovation merged. When the bungalow was completed, the forms were so contrast to the neighbors, and the neighbors called it the box house, the spaceship, the house without roof, etc. There's so many things that they talk about. They invented metaphors. Here we managed to build modern forms, but with subtle cultural and religious narratives that gives meaning and emotional attachment to the occupant. Now, this led to my final showcase of my work, which recently won the PAM Award, and eventually led to the invitation to this talk. The Election Commission's headquarters building was our winning design competition organized by the developer Putrajaya Holdings back in 2008. The site is relatively small, 0.6 acres. The site plot dictates strongly the shape and form of what the building will eventually be built. The site is a little bit hidden away from the main Putrajaya Boulevard, but exposed towards the east to an open green hill park. As a start, we were looking for something to relate to, and we start with looking at some forms. And conceptually, we were looking at many, many types of ballot boxes that may relate to the function that is meant to be. Well, here's a short video and how we came up and how we conceived the idea. Oops, sorry. This video explains the symbolism that is present in the design and proves innovatively that it is not just a boring white transparent box, but it gives metaphorical meanings to building owner and people who works in it. It is basically a two-zone building, primarily a private realm, office meeting rooms on the upper section, stacked on the public realm, such as gallery, space, and cafe on the ground to the fourth floor. Generally simple floor plates with a central core, and we made models. We tested them to test on the facade, and also we tested on the lighting effect on the building. The facade of the building is punctuated with this crisscross pattern. It's a voting pattern, and it's very much apparent even during the day and during the night. And the floodlights at night, as you can see, is celebrating this. It works in the day, as I've mentioned, and it works at night, and the light colors changes according to event and festivities. The product is a single glass box sitting on pilotis with crisscross voting marks displayed all over the facade. And here's another short video of the completed building. The whitewash color of the building are in complete contrast within its beige context. This was intentionally decided. We call it harmony in contrast. At a certain angle, the sun shades becoming solid. It looks like it's totally white. And this proves us that it is successfully, it makes it very much efficient to cut the direct sunlight into the building at that angle. Private gardens is situated at the top with views towards the south. We feel we have successfully managed to merge the innovative approach with the subtle symbolic gesture that the building needs. This eventually creates emotional attachments as something that is very important to the end users, as well as a symbol of progress to the general public. Finally, this showcase of works proves that the convergence of innovation and symbolism works in our favor. By adopting the attitude of convergence, it empowers the architect to be responsive designers. It empowers clients to be participative co-author of the design. And it empowers the public or the end user to relate quickly to innovative ideas, and at the same time not alienating history, culture, values that we are all can relate to. I believe the pendulum will keep on swinging. It is how the architect manages the merging of symbols and innovation harmoniously. The power of the architect lies in the ability to converge symbolism and innovation to produce good architecture. With that, I thank you.